Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Slow Your Roll. Got a very special episode today. We're joined by Matt Brown, and I'm always here with Connor, of course. You guys know that on the college football episodes. So, Matt, you want to go ahead and say what's up to everybody?
Hey
Introduce
everybody,
yourself?
thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, so, today, Matt is a expert of the college sports world. He's been a guy that has dropped some big reports on new NCAA football games. So we'll ask him a few questions about that. And then, of course, the season just wrapped up. There's a lot to talk about with that. Just today, Kalen DeBoer, new head coach at Alabama. So, Connor, is there anything you wanted to ask Matt to lead us off today?
Yeah. So when it comes to the new NCAA game, I've been obviously I played NCAA 14 this morning. I've been playing it for the last I don't even know how long in my life. It's been one of my favorite games of all time. Is there like a specific drop date, or are they still doing that in the works?
Um, EA has been telling schools recently that their plan is to release the game in July.
Okay.
The company in interviews with other industry journals and in their last I think the last press release and their commentary after the end of the Brandar lawsuit, they've been saying summer. So I don't know the exact date. And candidly, I don't think it matters that much because they could say it's going to be July 4th now, and then depending on last minute Q&A or depending on physical distribution or some other things, maybe that has to change a couple days one way or another. That's not super uncommon. So I would just tell people you should be ready in July. And the I imagine as we get closer to July, they will share more specifics. But that's been the internal expectation right
Okay.
Thank you.
Another question I have, do you know much about the game engine at all? Like, or has that been just super bland?
so I actually wrote a little bit about this earlier this week. Kind of to backtrack. If you don't know who I am, I should have actually introduced myself. I write Extra Points, which is a newsletter at extrapointsmb.com. I've been doing this full time since 2020. Been a working sports writer for 8 years before that. But Extra Points covers off the field stories in college athletics, which includes some writing about this video game because that's a big sponsorship and intellectual property and sports business story. But it also means I write about things like NIL, about television market valuation, about coaching contracts, and a lot of that back end stuff. And so independent of this game, I get asked a lot from not just consumers, but from athletic directors and agents and some of these licensing companies about, well, when are we going to have a basketball game? Or when are we going to have a baseball game? Or why is the game going slowly? Because, lots of people make money when there's a big video game. And engines are part of the reason. So I'll try to zoom out and explain this the best I can as a liberal arts major to potentially other liberal arts majors, right? When we talk about a game engine, in and of itself, that doesn't tell us a whole lot about the game, about the finished product. An engine is basically just a series of development tools and frameworks that make creating programs easier because it standardizes some of that process. EA, for many of their games, has used an engine that they built themselves called Frostbite. That engine was originally built to support first-person shooters, but it's been used for many other games, like their hockey games, their golf games, Madden, and other non-sports titles. If you play a lot of games, you probably recognize the Unreal Engine, which is a very popular 3D development tool that is used for everything from third-person RPGs to puzzle games to first-person shooters. I wrote a computer game that I sell recently called Athletic Director Simulator that was built on something called Construct. And Construct is mostly built for 2D side-scrolling games, but I made a text adventure game. So I say all of that to say that my understanding is that the same engine that is used to make the code for Madden is what's going to be used for this. But a consumer shouldn't hear that and freak out if they don't like Madden. Because two things using the same engine in and of itself doesn't mean that they'll be any more similar than this game will be to Battlefront or to the last Star Wars game or to golf. Clearly, they're not. They're very different games. They're using a similar development framework, and it makes sense for one big company to possible to expedite some of that development process. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank
Yeah,
you. That was incredibly
absolutely.
detailed description of that. That was perfect. One of the things following, the whole debacle in the national championship when everybody was like expecting some huge announcement, it went from just expect something small to Twitter blowing it up into this, oh, a trailer is coming during the national championship. I never thought that was going to happen. I thought if we were getting something, it was definitely going to be very small. But what is a relative time range before the game is being released this summer that we could expect to start to see types of trailers or bits and pieces of gameplay?
Well, historically speaking, AAA sports games don't share gameplay trailers until very close to release. Um, right? Like the sports game that I play the most independent of college football is NBA 2K. And you generally don't get to see what NBA 2K actually looks like until like 3 weeks before the game is being played. And even that trailer you see is not super predictive of what the game actually looks like. You'll see some development journals about gameplay features and everything, but a lot of that doesn't happen until 3 to 4 weeks out. Now, my understanding from talking to people at EA is that they want to share information well before June. Whether that's a gameplay trailer or not, I can't say. I would encourage everybody, as always, to keep your expectations modest. But they also recognize that this game hasn't come out in a decade. It's being rebuilt from the ground up in many different ways, and that there's enormous interest. What developers have told me and members of their communication staff have told me is EA wants to control the release of that information. So we've had about a year and a half of drip, 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 mostly from me, also from some other reporters, but EA has generally not been in charge of that, right? That's stuff that's come from schools. It's come from one team partners. It's come from Brandar. It's come from open records, right? And EA is like for the gameplay stuff, the granular things. We want to do that because we're accountable to our shareholders. We spent all the money on this. And so the timeline that's been shared with me is we want to begin to answer some of these questions with more specificity in late Q1, which would be the February, March range. And then as you get closer, share more specificity. But lest the internet freak out again, let me be very clear. I am not saying trailer tomorrow. I'm not saying, I'm not even saying trailer in March. I'm saying, that the timeline that I just shared with you is what has been shared with me from people that work at the company.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And hopefully that provides some clarity to people out there that were very disappointed this past Monday, even though you shouldn't have been. Hopefully you can learn a little bit from that and use that moving forward in terms of your expectations. But Connor, do you have anything else?
Yeah, just one last thing. I've been trying to dig into it a little bit, but I have seen some articles about it, but I just want to make sure. I want to see if if like for instance like in Road to Glory or in like Dynasty mode, is like the transfer portal and NIL going to be used a lot in those modes? Do you know anything about that?
So I can't speak to a lot, what I can, and I can speak to very, very little about what Road to Glory is going to look like. What
Absolutely.
I've been told is EA is wanting to spend an enormous amount of time and energy to make the game as realistic as possible and as accurate as possible. And recruiting clearly looks very, very different from where it did in 2013, 2014. And not even
Absolutely.
just about NIL and the transfer portal. Scholarship limits are different. The number of kids you can actually sign are different. The entire process is different. So what EA has done is they've brought in ex-coaches. They've had a couple of national reporters sign NDAs and consult on that process to make it more realistic. And what I have been told is that the transfer portal and NIL will exist. Because they are a very significant part of modern recruiting, they will exist in the game. What that looks like in practice, I don't want to speculate. And whether it's a little or a lot, or whether there'll be sliders, whether it'll look different in different modes, I can't tell you. What I feel comfortable saying is the experience from in Dynasty mode specifically, what recruiting looked like on a week to week basis, you should expect that to look different. And you should expect roster management in the new game to more accurately reflect what roster management looks like in 2024 compared to 2013.
Awesome. Thank you so much. As a like college football recruiting nerd myself, it's one of the things I look into the most. It's one of the things I always pay attention to. And also, you answered one of my questions alone, and also the roster development, how scholarship limits have changed, and so that's awesome. Thank you
Yeah,
so
I
much
think
for that.
I think the way it was last described to me is that the team wants to create a feeling of attachment as you were going through Dynasty, so that if you sign somebody in week 4, that the player feels excited to keep to be able to play with that player next year and feels a sense of reward throughout the week-to-week process, rather than maybe just automatically simulating to the offseason and kind of going through from there. But that's a high-level goal. What that looks like in the nuts and bolts practice, I don't know. And quite frankly, it might even be different now than where it was the last time I talked to people about that, because that's how software development works. Um, if I get a chance to learn more, I would be very happy to share it. But that's what I have right now.
Thank you. I
Thank you so much.
appreciate that. I think one of the things that honestly I see like asked in like my comments the most is honestly what Connor just mentioned about like NIL and its involvement in recruiting when it comes to like Dynasty. I think I don't have a source, but I think what I try to explain is that recruiting is so much more complex than it was back then, just in terms of like the whole, I think like the whole like recruiting process in terms of how much media is involved has just gotten even more elevated over the past 10 years to where we see, things like decommitments. That wasn't in NCAA 14. You locked in a commitment in week 4, like you said, and just sim to the end of the year. It may not be like that. Or like, I don't think it's insanely likely that we see like super specific NIL within the game, but I try to tell people it's more likely we see like what kind of collective does a school have, and that can be an influencing factor towards recruits within the game. So that's kind of the thing I try to tell people in terms of expectations wise. I'm not saying it's impossible, but that's kind of what I've told people as they've responded to me with that. I don't know if you would agree with that same thought process or if you'd be somewhere
Yeah,
else on that.
I mean, it's entirely possible. I think in general, it's probably a safer bet to think more conservatively than specifically, just given the massive scope of the entire project. I think that's possible. I think it's also possible it ends up being more specific than that, right? Or more granular. I recognize this makes for an unsatisfying podcast like answer. The truth is, I'm not really sure, and I don't want to speculate because um, many people who listen to these shows or read what I write are incapable of deciphering nuance. And so I'm trying to limit myself to stuff that I either have a direct sourcing for or can produce a receipt. I mean, I have some educated guesses what this is going to look like, but like I have to keep that to myself because I don't want people screaming at me in 6 weeks, you know?
Absolutely.
You don't want to put something out there and everyone will be like, oh, he's wrong, and you want to just make sure that it's like keep it to yourself so you can not be attacked by these people who think they know everything or they know absolutely nothing.
I mean, it's. I mean, not to kind of steer this into a ditch. One of the things I've learned that's different about writing for a video game centric audience versus my normal audience, because again, like I'm not a video game reporter by trade. It's not typically how I make my money. That I could say I think about something conversationally. Like I said, I have an educated guess, or this is what I'm hearing, and the audience will respond one way, and for video games it's a very different way. Like the thing I would really encourage anyone listening to this to think about over the next couple of months is where you get your information about this project. And if you see something on Instagram or you hear it on TikTok or you see it on Twitter, you have to ask yourself, where is this coming from? If someone is using really passive language and saying like it's expected or it's reported that such and such, you got to ask like expected by who? Reported by who? Where is this coming from, right? If you pull that thread a little bit, like, oh, the original source was some guy named Dick Boner 69 on Twitter, then like forget that. Um, I am not the only guy on this beat. I am not the only person EA talks to. In many cases, if they have something they want to share, they're going to go out of their way to not talk to me because I'm not on their Christmas card list. So I'm not saying I'm the only source. I'm definitely not. But when I look back at what happened earlier this week, and when I look at how a lot of my reporting kind of gets redistributed and reaggregated, it's very frustrating to me to see people take shortcuts in how they read or to try and hype something up to be more than it actually is for social media clout. And I think that led a lot of people to be misinformed over the national championship game, and it's led to some people being misinformed over the past couple of months. Um, and that is going to change not just how I talk about this, or I can tell you it already is changing how EA does. Because if expectations get out of control for something that they were going to share, they're a big corporation. They're going to err on the conservative side. They're going to shut their mouth rather than, follow through, but fail to fulfill what suddenly the internet is asking for.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that little caveat or disclaimer, whatever you want to call it. I appreciate that because it is easy in this world for things to get blown out of proportion like that. Honestly, I'll just go. Well, this will be our last question about the game, and then I do have some other questions about
Sure.
the bowl game world and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
What would you say in the past month and a half, 2 months, the biggest or thing you're most excited about personally that you've heard?
That I've heard? I think I've already reported a couple of times
Okay.
about what I've heard. I'm excited for a modernized, gameplay loop. I'm excited for the game to more accurately represent what college football's like. You guys can't see it, but off to the other side of my office, I've got a 360. Damn thing sounds like an airplane taking off every time I turn it on, right? Because I bought it used, it's been around the block for a little bit, but there's no playoff. There's almost no there's almost no transferring. There's no decommitments. Sports Illustrated has an outsized role, which of course is not terribly accurate now. The audio recordings are kind of dated, were dated when they came out in 2014. None of those are going to be none of the audio in the last game is going to be used in this one. It's all completely new. And so because college football has changed so much, not just administratively, but also schematically. I'm excited to play that, right? Like the last big playbook option, big kind of technical reform from NCAA 2013 and 14 was the option. Made it easier to execute read options. It made it easier for misdirections and running plays to be a part of your handbook, your playbook, which was important because around 2013, 14, 15, 16, a quarterback read option play was like a bread and butter play for like 70% of college football offenses. Most schools ran some variation of a power spread, where you would that was a big part of your run game. It's a little bit less the case now. RPOs are a gigantic part, and you see that a little bit in Madden. That wasn't as much a thing in college playbooks. Um, we're getting to see more teams huddle more, and before it was kind of in the other direction where Oregon and to a lesser extent what like BYU were doing and running 100 plays a game was in more vogue. So I'm excited to be able to sit down on my couch and play something that more closely resembles what I write about on a day-to-day basis. Um, and I think that'll be a lot of fun this summer.
Yeah, thank you. I love that answer. That's honestly the best answer I've heard about, like, in terms of things to be excited for. So I liked that. One of the things I have seen you talk about a lot was the Pop Tart Bowl. I
Yeah.
think everybody loved that. That was a super fun thing, and we're in an age now where bowl games that aren't involved with the college football playoff, there's opt outs or just people don't care at the level they used to. So do you think like the future of bowl games is seeing more gimmicky stuff like that to get people involved in those bowl games that otherwise wouldn't get as crazy amounts of attention?
There's gonna be some part of that. So I'll try to peel back the curtain a little bit and explain, like, when we talk about a problem with bowls, I don't think it's the same across all bowl games, right? Where you have some of the biggest problems right now are with these games that used to carry a fair amount of prestige because they were played on January 1st, or they historically, attracted 9, 10, 11 win teams. Your New Year's Six kind of bowl games, your Citrus Bowl, your Cotton Bowl sort of things. And there you're seeing a bunch of calendar things all happen at the same time. So part of it is you have players opting out. And to be clear, like that was a thing that happened before the transfer portal and before NIL. Once players realized that getting injured in a bowl game that no longer has championship implications could substantially diminish your NFL earning potential. If you were a third round pick and you tear your ACL, you might be a sixth round pick now. You might go from mid round, your second day pick to undrafted or first to third round, right? And you can't just buy an insurance policy for one game in a way that's going to be cost effective, right? I think Christian McCaffrey was one of the first guys that really kind of did this with the Sun Bowl, right? So, but NIL and the portal have accelerated that. You also have the fact that in mid-December, you have almost every assistant coach in the country is looking for another job right now. So a lot of the national conversation around, oh, these kids are checking out me first, college students, they're only mirroring what they're seeing their assistants do, and everybody's doing this. Whether it's the interview palooza at the National Football Foundation dinner in Las Vegas, whether it's prepping for the football coaches convention at the national championship game, whether it's going to airport Hiltons all over the country, everyone's looking for their next gig, including the adults, right? You also have National Signing Day, the early National Signing Day, which is in late December, which is when 80% of good high school football players are committing. And so coaches have to be laser focused on that. And then now you also have the transfer portal, which for some schools is going to be 30% of their roster, maybe more. So when all those things all happen at the same time, it's very hard for anybody to give a crap about the Alamo Bowl or about the Cotton Bowl. And so we saw, at every New Year's Six game, I think there was a pretty big difference between which team actually cared, and not just going through the motions, but like who's literally going to show up to play, which is a hard thing to fix because you can't change when the transfer portal opens. That's tied to the academic calendar. I wrote about that in the newsletter today. Can't really change when the bowl games are played. That's up to the broadcaster, and this is the only time of year that they're valuable. So there are other things behind that I think that you might be able to do to build up some stakes, but a thing that doesn't really cost any of the players or schools any money is to get very stupid. And that's what the Pop-Tarts Bowl did. That's what the Mayo Bowl has done. That's what the Potato Bowl has done. That's what the Cheez-It Bowl historically did. Or like the joke I wrote on the newsletter is like a great bowl sponsor is something you can buy at a gas station or something you could buy at Home Depot or Menards, right? Like, and you can't buy a missile at Menards. You can't buy financial securities or like roofing repair or whatever baloney companies the other things are. But you can buy a big pallet of Pop-Tarts. And once you kind of have a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, this is going to be silly, and we're going to do some silly things, and you shouldn't take it super seriously, then it becomes a better television event. I don't think anybody can sit there and wax rhapsodic about the sanctity of the Gronk Bowl or the Las Vegas Bowl or something with a straight face because everybody recognizes, man, this shit does not matter anymore. And when there's this much money at stake, people are gonna make choices to protect that.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was a great answer. I love that. I loved how you mentioned honestly like about the coaches checking out too. It's not necessarily just like, it's both sides.
Oh yeah.
And I think
it's everybody.
Yeah.
It's trainers, it's SIDs, it's Christmas, man. Do you work super hard at the end of the year? Are you doing your best schoolwork, 2 days before finals? Are you doing your best work December 21st? I'm not.
Absolutely
they're people.
Yeah. So I think we saw like a big situation like that with Oregon State and Jonathan Smith. The day after the Civil War, he was on a plane to East Lansing and hired as Michigan State's coach. So I think it's like, honestly, I think from what I've heard, Connor can speak better on this. He is a reporter at Oregon State. So from what I've heard, the players, as of the Civil War, were checked out going into that game because they knew that something was going on with Smith at that point already during the regular season.
So the day before the game, Smith told the team he was leaving. Basically, he didn't say exactly he was leaving, but he said he was looking at his options. And when a coach says he's looking at his options, there's like a 90% chance he's gone. So the team knew he was out of the game. And what happens when a coach tells you that is the players are like, why should I give my effort for this guy? Why should I go out on that field to risk my health for this guy who is just going to leave anyway? And we saw that. I mean, we played in the Sun Bowl versus Notre Dame, right? We were a top 20 team in the country, and we looked like a JV squad because we over 50% of our starters left, including two of our quarterbacks, some of our wide receivers. Over half of our defense. Actually, sorry, almost all of our defensive starters were gone. It's something that happens when coaches just. Jonathan Smith left. He took our OC, our O-line coach, our defensive coordinator, transfer over our head coach, Trent Bray, which is good. He stayed. He took our recruiting director. He took our tight ends coach. He took almost everyone. And it just sucks, especially because he was an alum too. He was an alum, and he did us so incredibly dirty, especially with realignment and how we got screwed over with the conferences thing. It's another reason of why I'm never gonna be mad at a kid who changes schools like that, because coaches don't get the same hate for it. They just leave, and everyone's like, "Oh, good for him. He got a good
Yeah.
job. Good for him." And they just instantly hate on the kids who do it when they're doing the thing that's best for themselves. That's just my take on it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And even if you're staying on campus, right, where you haven't immediately hit the transfer portal, you got to think, Smith was the guy that recruited me, or this assistant was the guy that recruited me. Just like at work, if your boss leaves or your boss's boss leaves, that changes your working experience. Any Everybody's got to be thinking, I got to be protecting myself, because who knows what the new guy is going to think about me and how I fit in with everything, and you can't blame anybody for that. I mean, I don't know. I transferred schools when I was an undergrad, and part of it was because of other people leaving. Like, and lots of people do that in their undergraduate career, and that's just life, man.
Yeah,
I have a friend who
absolutely.
transferred here, so I totally get that.
So one thing I wanted to ask you about, honestly, is because I haven't had a chance over these past couple days to really read into the situation, but Florida State, they've received a couple of punishments as a result of some NIL violations. I don't know a ton about this at the moment. Matt, what could we expect to, either whether it's farther punishment or an appeal from Florida State? What could we expect to come from this? Or is what we've already got all that's going to come of this?
I mean, there's always a trickle effect, right? And this is a very interesting story, because this is the first time the NCAA has attempted to, I would say, impose any kind of meaningful punishment related to violations of the NCAA's NIL policy. The policy states right now that NIL is not supposed to be used as a recruiting inducement, which it is literally everywhere, and it's literally everywhere very explicitly. It's how collectives advertise themselves. There's not supposed to be facilitated contact between recruits, coaches, and collectives, which happens literally everywhere. I'm not When I say that, I don't mean, oh, just big time football programs in the ACC, Big Ten, and SEC. I mean, like, no, I mean, like, Bradley does this, man. Bryant does this. Like low major, no football school kind of places are doing the things that Florida State got dinged for here. Um, and so if the NCAA is going to actually start going after some of those things when they've had a year and a half to ask Congress to help them, or to try and get antitrust protection to enforce some of these rules, I think this is significant, because there's a lot of concern within the legal community, the people that I write for a lot, that many of these NCAA NIL policy bylaws wouldn't stand up to a lawsuit. But it doesn't look like Florida State's going to sue to fight this particular thing. And part of that, as I understand it, is that what was announced this week is a negotiated settlement, meaning, on kind of what I've been hearing, is that the NCAA wanted to charge Florida State with way, bigger penalties, level one violation kind of things. And just like if the cops trying to charge you with one thing and you could plead down to a lesser charge and then get community service or something else, I think that's kind of where this is. What is going to be fascinating is who's next, because I can tell you guys, Florida State's not the only school that NCAA investigators have been sniffing around on the NIL beat for the last year. Um, a lot of big time Big Ten and SEC programs. And you don't need to be Encyclopedia Brown to figure out who some of those might be. I've also had investigators interviewing people and poking around. We'll see what sticks, and we'll see what ends up drawing another combative lawsuit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Matt. That was very insightful and informative for me, at least. Connor, did you have any questions about NIL stuff going on? Anything in
Uh,
terms of that?
all mine have already been answered basically, so I'm all set on that one.
Okay. Okay. So I guess my question is, in terms of NIL, like, with this Florida State situation, and like you're saying, they are poking around in other programs. What are the odds we start to see teams take a step back from NIL as these punishments start to come from other schools? Or do you think, like, the age we're in now and the point we're at will just continue forever regardless?
Well, I think neither is the answer.
Okay.
Nobody is going to stop being invested in NIL because there's been an underground economy to compensate athletes to pick a school for literally 150 years. Like Yale and Princeton were doing this. And once the toothpaste is out of the tube and people realize that somebody's going to pay you 200 grand, 250 grand, maybe more to enroll somewhere, you can't really claw that back absent a bunch of lawsuits or absent being paid an actual salary. Like if people like that pressure is not going to go away. And even if a school does take a step back, there's no way to stop the collective or to stop fans or boosters from doing some of those things. The punishment here, like Florida State didn't get a bowl ban. Their head coach received no sanctions whatsoever. You have a nominal decrease in scholarships. You're getting on probation, and the collective you have to disassociate from wasn't the biggest collective for the school anyway. So it's not that big of a punishment. So no, I don't think any of this is going to deter anything. It might eventually deter how some groups go about going about their business. The only thing that I think really changes how NIL really works are either federal law changes or the courts ruling that athletes are employees. And the courts are going to do that. They're going to do that in the next 18 months. And almost everybody working in this industry understands that. What we don't know is what Congress will end up doing. And if you go to a professionalized model and you can have a CBA, you can enforce rules that lock most of the NIL stuff out, or force it to be connected to brands. That's not where we are now. That might be where we end up in a year or two. That may not be something Oregon State might love. But at the end of the day, it's not only up to the NCAA. It's up to the federal court system. And they, both conservative and progressive judges now at multiple levels, have expressed a lot of skepticism about the NCAA's amateurism arguments.
Thank you. I like that. So honestly, getting ready to wrap up here, Matt. Was there anything you wanted to share, talk about, shout out, anything like that before we wrapped up for today?
No, I don't think so. I think, if you're interested in how the sausage is made in this whole industry, not just in Power 5 football, but across multiple sports and from divisions 1, 2, and 3, I think you'd enjoy the newsletter, which you can find at extrapointsmb.com.
We will have that linked, everybody, for y'all. So thank you so much, Matt, for joining us today. And that'll do it, guys. Peace out.